You are listening to Elderberry Croft, Seasons of the Heart, Book 5, May Enchantment, written and narrated by Becky Dowdy. May Enchantment, Chapter 1. The man had not been back. He assured her of it repeatedly. She was crying anyway. She was trying not to, he could tell, but the tears still leaked out of the corners of her eyes. Well, shoot, what was he supposed to do now? Wait for her to get a hold of herself? Or just keep talking like he didn't notice? Go on, she urged, as though reading his mind.
He just walked on out of here and disappeared into the night. I've been watching for him since, and so has Doc, but we haven't seen anything suspicious around here for weeks now.
Eddie reached up with both hands and roughly curled the bill of his Flying J baseball cap, settling it more firmly on his head.
Look, I didn't tell you this to get you all nervous and worked up. I wasn't even going to say anything because people tend to start acting paranoid about every rustle in the bushes they hear outside their windows at night. But I figure you and the other girls back here ought to know, just so you keep your doors locked and have your antennas up.
He knew he sounded cranky, but she was making him nervous, making him jabber away like a little schoolgirl. If she'd gotten all freaked out and scared, he'd have been better equipped. But Willow Goodhope's teary-eyed stare made him squirm. He cleared his throat to steady his nerves and opened his mouth to speak. Then he paused, catching a whiff of something familiar in the air, like woodshop and mineral oil. Nah, couldn't be. There was nothing but flowers everywhere he turned.
So anyway, I still have to go talk to Kathy. You going to be all right?
Thank you for letting me know, Eddie. Yes, I'll be fine. They stood at her front door beneath the hand-painted sign that read Elderberry Croft. He shuffled his weight back and forth over his feet, not knowing what to do with his hands. He took a step backward and bumped up against a potted plant. Dang it! He reached down quickly to right the pot before it toppled over. Getting to Willow's front door was an obstacle course for a big man like himself, and he preferred to catch her when she was outside already. Today, though, after walking by her place 3 different times, he'd finally sucked it up and braved the gauntlet of her crowded patio. Nothing about this visit was easy, and he quickly made his way off the front stoop before he had any other mishaps. Eddie? He paused just past the steps, but when she didn't continue, he wondered if he'd just imagined it. Well, he couldn't stand there all day.
Did you need something else?
Did you see him? His face? Her voice sounded tight, uncertain. Do you know what he looks like? Eddie shook his head.
Nope. I only caught a glimpse of him from a distance, and it was at night. He was tall, but I could tell he wasn't a big guy, maybe a little shorter than I am.
He took off his hat and scratched the top of his head.
But you might want to ask Shelley over in space number 8 about him. She noticed him first.
He returned the cap to his head again. Glancing over at the little stream dividing the front of the coach house trailer park from the back of the property, he paused, remembering something.
When he passed under the light on your bridge, I could see he had longish hair, dark, not like Jesus long, more like it's been a while since he's seen a barber, like mine.
He shrugged.
But he didn't turn around. I didn't see his face.
Willow stood in her doorway under the shadowy front porch, but he could see her nod, almost as though she'd expected to hear those words from him.
Do you have any idea who it might be? He prompted. Is it someone you know?
She just shook her head, and Eddie didn't know what else to say, so he turned and walked away. This was one part of his job he didn't like, all this emotional hoopla. Most of the time, folks at the coach house trailer park just kept to themselves. Except for when they paid their space rentals, he only really mingled with the ladies if they needed something fixed or had issues with the property, like falling branches or stray animals. Some of the tenants got together on Myra's front porch in the evenings, playing poker for cigarettes and lottery tickets, and he'd stop in if there wasn't a game on. But he just didn't have what it took to feel comfortable around people on a regular basis. Oh, he didn't mind sitting in his mom's trailer over a meal of pot roast and potatoes, but then she did all the talking, not expecting him to do more than grunt a few times in agreement with whatever she was yabbering on about. She really didn't want his opinion anyway. That's what she had Donny for. Donny was the thinker. Donny was the philosopher. Donny was the ladies' man. Donny was the mama's boy. Donny, Donny, Donny. Yeah, well, Donny couldn't keep a job any longer than he could keep a girlfriend. Except for Sheena. For some reason, Sheena kept taking him back. Oh, she'd warn him, she'd threaten him within an inch of his life, but he always screwed up, and Sheena always kicked him out. Then he'd apologize, flash those girly eyes at her. No man should have eyes like Donny's, and she'd take him back. There was a time when Eddie could have cared less, mainly because he knew Donny for what he was, a lazy, good-for-nothing scoundrel. Because Eddie saw through his charm and good looks, he'd had no trouble resisting his kid brother when he asked for money, a job, beer, gas for his car, a place to stay. He hadn't known Sheena from the Easter Bunny, so if the girl wanted to play games with Donny, who was Eddie to step in and spoil their fun? Until the time Sheena came running to Eddie for advice and comfort, and Eddie discovered something about Donny he couldn't say no to. Donny's girl. Donny had never forgiven him, and Eddie couldn't forgive Donny for being the one Sheena wanted. It made no difference to his heart that Sheena had always belonged to his brother, that Eddie was just the rebound guy. It didn't matter that Sheena felt alive and on fire when she was with Donny. All that mattered to Eddie's heart was the way she'd nestled against his side and whispered that she'd never felt so safe and protected than she did when she was tucked under his wing. A few weeks ago, Donny moved back in with Mom. Again. Eddie tried not to think about what his brother must have done to Sheena to make her kick him out this time. Part of him wanted to call her, to make sure she was okay, to be there for her. But he knew better. "Mind your own Jim Beam, Eddie," he muttered in a voice that sounded a whole lot like his father's. "Stay out of the pigsty and you won't smell like manure." Except Eddie's words weren't slurred, and Jim Beam was just a figure of speech to him. Eddie had dated a few times, once seriously, in fact. But then his stomach started acting up and he'd been diagnosed with the big C in his colon. The cancer had been obliterated with drugs, radiation, and a surgery that left him with a bag grafted to his abdomen just below his beltline. He decided it was more than any woman should have to handle: the smell, the sight, the hassle, his potentially early death. And he broke it off with Leanne. Sadly, she'd seemed relieved when he did, confirming his decision. He'd lost a few pounds, then gained them all back again and more, but he'd kept his resolve to not saddle anyone else with his problems. He certainly hadn't told Donny, and unless Leanne had spilled her guts, not even Mom knew how sick he'd been. But then Mom didn't really want to know about stuff like that. She didn't want to consider the fact that Eddie might die before she did. She didn't want to admit that her precious baby boy, Donny, was a loser. Nor did she want to believe that when Dad left a few years ago, it wasn't a round trip. May Enchantment. Chapter 2. Kathy was completely unconcerned about the stranger, but not in a way that made him feel any better. She'd seen the man, but she hadn't given him much thought, at least not enough to bother mentioning him to Eddie. She'd been working in her yard one night when he came by, and they'd greeted each other pleasantly.
"He didn't act like he had anything to hide," she said. "In the middle of the night? You didn't think that was a little strange? Didn't bother asking what he was doing here walking around in the dark?"
Eddie couldn't understand this woman any better than he could Willow Goodhope, but for very different reasons.
"I don't keep track of the time, Eddie, you know that. It could have been 10 o'clock in the morning for all I know. I was up, why shouldn't he be?"
She hadn't paid any more attention to him after he'd wished her a good evening.
"I just assumed he was visiting someone back here, that he was taking a stroll around the neighborhood or heading home. I saw nothing suspicious about him." "Well, do me a favor. Next time you see him, please call me. He doesn't belong back here, and we don't need any trouble." "Oh, I don't. Just do it, Kathy. Please. He has no business being back here. None. Got it?"
Sure. I just hope I don't see him." Kathy scooped up the cat that was tangling itself between her legs and turned without another word, her dogs following on her heels.
"Women,"
Eddie grumbled as he hitched up his jeans and headed back across the bridge to his own place. Today, having dealt with a few too many of them and all their frustrating emotions, he was reminded again of why being single worked just fine for him. Sure, a warm body in his bed, a tender word to start the day, a feminine touch here and there in his trailer, none of that would be a problem. In fact, he'd be the first to admit he'd like those things, especially if it all came with someone who liked to make a good steak and egg burrito and didn't mind washing a few clothes. But the ups and downs of a woman's mood, the unpredictability of their very nature, he just didn't think he had it in him to take one on full time. Mounting the 3 steps of his little stoop, he paused when he heard his name. Turning, he saw Myra scurrying across the driveway toward him. Now what? "Have you heard anything about Shadowman?" He reached for the dulled knob on his door and gave it a good tug. "Who?" It stuck at the top corner. He'd been meaning to shave it down for months, and it came open suddenly in his hand, nearly knocking him off the top step.
"What are you talking about, Myra?"
"Shadowman, the man in the shadows, that's what we're calling him."
"Good King Midas, Myra, are you serious? You named him? He's just a guy, not some evil supervillain."
"Well, he's obviously up to no good, sneaking around our homes in the dead of night. Have you called the police? I mean, this kind of thing could really affect my health, Eddie. My heart can't take the stress, you know. My doctor says I could go at any time." Eddie took a deep breath, then let it out very slowly, squinting his eyes as he looked past Myra to the front door of her trailer. How he wished he could just put his hands on her scrawny shoulders, turn her around, and send her marching right back across the drive. At least when she was standing on her own porch hollering at him in her scratchy voice, he could pretend not to understand what she was saying.
"Look, Myra, Doc is keeping an eye out at that end of the park, and I'm—"
"Doc? You expect Doc to catch him? Once Doc takes his sleeping pill, you couldn't wake him up with a baseball bat. Ay, Eddie, we're all going to be killed in our sleep."
"Myra!
He said her name twice before she clamped her mouth shut and stopped waving her hands in the air. They stared at each other a few moments, a standoff of sorts. Then Myra harumphed, spun on her heels, and went home. Eddie leaned forward and banged his forehead on the edge of his door a few times. Closing it behind him in relief, he thought about the varied reactions he'd been getting over this stranger in the park. In a way, he understood Myra and her amped-up fear. He didn't like the uncertainty the guy stirred up around here either. In a way, he understood Shelley's calm concern, the woman who'd first reported seeing the man. He even understood Kathy's reservations to get anyone in trouble. Eddie didn't need the hassle that came with involving the police in the affairs of the park. This was his little kingdom, and he preferred to keep things to a dull roar around here. But why did the news make Willow Goodhope cry? It seemed such a strange reaction to him. Was it someone she knew after all? And if so, why would she deny it? Inside his circa 1970s trailer, he dropped into the faux leather office chair at his formica-topped desk. He'd had the chair for so long, it had conformed to the shape of his backside, but it was comfortable, and no one else sat in it, so there was no one to complain about it. Besides, it had a high backrest, fully padded, and for someone as tall as he was, being able to rest your head on the back of a chair was a luxury. Sliding out the single file drawer where he kept all the folders on tenants, he pulled Willow's out and opened it on his desk. He wasn't sure what he was looking for, and he felt a little shady digging around in her business, but the more he thought about her reaction today, the more he thought he might be missing something. Her next of kin contact was her father, who lived in a retirement facility the next town over. She had references from past jobs, a receptionist in a doctor's office, a coffee barista, even a volunteer at a wildlife refuge where she'd been a field guide for student field trips. Everything panned out, nothing suspicious. So what was she crying about? Was it just one of those irrational fears that women have, like being afraid of lizards or crickets? Eddie closed the file and leaned back in his chair, bringing his arms up and linking his fingers together behind his head. His eyes lingered on the tab of the file that read space number 12 on it, scribbled in blue ink, his penmanship barely legible. Why did women have to be so hard to figure out? And this one in particular? A tentative knock on his door startled him, and he sat forward quickly, his right knee banging into the open file drawer. Dang it! Hobbling to the door, he thrust a shoulder into it, expecting it to stick, as usual. It didn't. Eddie stumbled forward, the door swinging wide, bumping hard against the person on the other side. He watched in horror as Willow Goodhope's arms flailed in circles, grasping for anything to keep from going backward down the 3 steps. Lunging for her, he grabbed the flap of her jacket just in time and yanked her upright, bringing her hard up against him. She, in turn, latched onto his shoulders like he'd just hauled her out of a nest of baby rattlers. Eddie released his grip on her clothing and stood, stiff as a barn door, both hands spread out at his sides, desperate to shut out the immediate awareness of the woman leaning on him and the fresh-cut wood smell of her hair rising up to taunt his senses. May Enchantment, Chapter 3. Women like Willow Goodhope didn't lean on men like Eddie Banks. They hung on the arms of pretty boys like Brad Pitt. Women like Willow didn't even go for guys like Donny. They knew better. She stepped away suddenly, as if realizing his thoughts, clenching and unclenching her fists in front of her. Eddie glared over her head at Myra's front window where the curtain moved unnaturally and muttered, "My fault. The door didn't stick." When she didn't respond, he looked down at her and saw the confusion on her face. What an idiot he must seem to her. "My door always sticks. I always have to shove on it. This time it didn't stick." "Stop talking, man. I didn't mean to launch you off the porch." She began to smile. Then she covered her mouth with her hand. A moment later, a laugh burst out between her fingers, and Eddie took a step back, eyes widening. It wasn't exactly a cackle, but the woman's laugh sounded more like something that would come out of a truck driver than a red-haired tree hugger. "Oh, Eddie," she gasped when she'd caught her breath enough to speak. Her hair had come loose from the clip holding it all at the back of her head, and she reached up to sweep back a few wild curls from her face. She straightened her jacket. "I'm just glad you caught me. I don't fall well, believe me. I rarely get seriously hurt, but I bruise like there's no tomorrow. And with skin this pale, Every color of the rainbow makes an appearance. Eddie eyed her. He felt compelled to say something, anything, but for the life of his mother, he couldn't think of a blasted thing. Anyway, thank you. She smiled, filling in for his lack of words. Do you have a minute? Can I talk to you?
Sure.
A direct question. That he could handle.
Come on in.
He tipped his head toward the sofa that dwarfed his narrow living room. Oh, okay. He sensed her hesitation, but not understanding it, he held his door open and waited for her to precede him inside. She entered, but stood just to one side of the entry, making him step around her. Her eyes darted around the room, and it finally occurred to him that she wasn't comfortable being inside and alone with him. Of course not. He'd been inside her cottage a month after she moved in, fixing the leaky faucet in her kitchen, and nothing in his place could hold a candle to her antique furniture and fancy trinkets scattered strategically around the room. Somehow, she made the little shack at space number 12 look like the hideaway of some gypsy princess, the way she draped colorful fabric around the room and hung strings of lights everywhere. His brown room, with its brown furniture and brown carpet, was foreign territory to someone like Willow Goodhope. With the toe of his boot, he flipped up the corner of the rubber welcome mat, lodging it against the open door.
What can I do for you?
She smiled gratefully, silently acknowledging his actions, and he watched as she took in the humble station in which he lived. I need to talk to you about that man.
All right.
He could tell she was struggling over what she wanted to say, but he made the decision not to care. If she was going to judge him based on his circumstances, then she was just more validation for his choices in the relationship department. Fickle woman. I think I might know who he is. She paused, and he said nothing, not quite willing to help her. She chewed on her bottom lip and gazed out the open door before continuing. I think it might be my husband, my ex-husband, or something like that. If she'd said she thought the man was Santa Claus, he might have been less surprised.
Something like a husband? What does that mean? Are you married or not?
And blast it all, there she was, tearing up again. Eddie scrubbed his jaw with the palm of his hand.
Okay, look, it doesn't matter to me, not really. All that matters is this. Do you want him here?
No, she stammered, her voice wavering.
Then that makes him a trespasser. If I run into him again, I'll let him know he's not welcome on the property. If he comes back after that, I'll call the cops. They can be here right quick. The station is just up the road, maybe a mile.
Oh, I don't think you'll have to go that far, Eddie. If it's him, he won't want the police involved. She crossed her arms like a shield in front of her, stilling the tremble in her hands by squeezing her upper arms. I just thought you should know. An unexpected urge flooded over him, something uncomfortably familiar to what he felt when he thought of Sheena. Eddie turned away, scoffing at his momentary sentiment, as though Willow would ever look to a guy like him for anything but fixing her toilet. He straightened the folders on his desk, tucking hers beneath the others, hoping she hadn't already seen it. Where were these ridiculous protective notions coming from?
So does that mean he's not dangerous? Or that he's so dangerous he can't afford to get the police involved?
His abrasive tone reflected his thoughts, and from the corner of his eyes he saw her flinch at his questions. He's not dangerous, she murmured, her eyes downcast, one booted foot twisting nervously. If it's him, he wouldn't want the police involved, for my sake. Eddie cleared his throat.
You're not making this any easier on me, Willow.
He leaned back against the edge of the desk and pinned her with a dubious look.
What does that mean? Are you hiding from the police?
No. Willow's eyes shot up to meet his, and she waved her hands frantically between them. "Oh no, it's not like that at all. He just knows I don't like drama in my life, and he would feel terrible if the police showed up on my doorstep because of him." Eddie reached up to grab the bill of his cap before remembering he'd tossed it on the sofa when he came inside. He rubbed the back of his neck instead, his frown deepening.
"Woman, you make no sense to me whatsoever. You stir up drama everywhere you go. The Davises haven't stopped talking about that anniversary party you threw them. Kathy thinks you're some kind of forest elf girl. Joe introduced his wife to me last month because you told him to man up. And now Shelley? She hasn't set foot outside her house in years, at least not during the daylight hours. But yesterday—" he waved a hand toward his kitchen counter across the room. "She showed up with that basket of muffins to thank me for looking out for all you ladies out back. She said you gave her the recipe." He shook a thick finger at her. "You're more excitement than this park has seen in all the years I've been working here. So don't try to tell me you don't like drama."
"Oh." Her voice was still small, but he thought he saw a flicker of pleasure on her face.
"Yeah, oh."
He rolled his eyes good-naturedly.
"So, just give me the facts, okay? Do I need to be worried about this guy, if he even is your husband, ex-husband, or something like it? Or do I just need to ask him nicely not to show his face around here anymore?"
Willow smiled openly now. "If it is my husband, ex-husband, or something like it, asking him nicely will do just fine." What was wrong with him? Why did that tiny glimpse of her smile make him feel like he'd been punched in the gut? Why did he want to see another one, a bigger one, to hear that ridiculous laugh of hers again? He started toward her, and she sidestepped, skittish as a wild animal in a cage.
"I'm not going to hurt you,"
he assured her, his voice brisk but low. What was she so afraid of?
"Just getting the door for you."
He flattened the mat with his foot, pushed the door open a little wider, and stepped back. She slipped out and scampered down the steps, turning around to face him on the last one. "Thank you, Eddie. Thank you for looking out for us girls, like Shelley said." She tucked a curl behind her ear and grinned. "Enjoy those muffins." Eddie just nodded as the girl darted off, taking her sunshine smile with her. But he thought he recognized the smell of fresh-cut pine lingering in the air inside his trailer. May Enchantment, Chapter 4. Husband, ex-husband, or something like it. Eddie couldn't get his mind off her words. That night, even the Lakers game didn't hold his attention for very long.
"Ridiculous," he muttered, shaking his head. "Complete nonsense."
But what stuck in his craw was the way she'd said those words, like she was scared, or wary, or a little lost. For some inconceivable reason, it reminded him of when he learned about the golf ball-sized tumor growing in his colon. Suddenly, at 41 years old, he was reduced to a lost little boy, his self-reliance and confidence imploding into a mass of fear that writhed and whirled in the pit of his stomach. Every day became a battle between putting on a brave front and facing the world as though nothing was wrong, and climbing behind the wheel of his beat-up F-150 and driving as fast and far away from the truth as he could. But the residents of the Coach House Trailer Park needed him. They always did. And he always answered the phone, the door. Each new day kept showing up, whether he wanted it to or not. And with it came wasp nests in the laundry shed, fallen branches in the rain gutters, and broken water heaters. When he finally worked up the courage to go under the knife, he told everyone he was taking a long overdue vacation, and even his mother thought it was about time. She arranged for Donny to cover for him, and Eddie arranged for Doc to babysit Donny. Doc knew about the bag attached to the hole in Eddie's gut. Once Leanne left, he had to tell someone, just in case there were complications. But Doc also knew how to keep secrets, because Doc had a few secrets of his own, and if there ever was anyone Eddie wanted at his back, it was the seasoned soldier. Eddie was big enough that he wasn't afraid of the old coot when he went into one of his post-traumatic stress episodes, and if it came right down to it, he'd rather meet death at the business end of a loaded .45 than at the end of a long, painful illness while being eaten up from the inside out. That was 4 years ago, and Eddie was no longer afraid of death. He was still a little leery about really living, but he'd grown accustomed to his lot in life and comfortable in his lowered expectations. Then came Willow Goodhope. People all over the park were talking about her. Myra insisted she was an angel sent from heaven to help prepare the way for those who'd be leaving Earth soon. Al, in his trailer near the park entrance, confided to Eddie last month that he now kept his blinds open in the afternoon.
That little strawberry checks her mail every day at 3:30 sharp. I set all my clocks by her,
Al explained, tapping the watch on his wrist and blushing a little redder under his naturally ruddy complexion. Doc just grinned every time her name came up, although he never said a word. Donny, thank God, had yet to meet her, but now that he was living with Mom again, he would make it his business to do so, Eddie was sure of it. He clenched his teeth at the notion of his kid brother flashing his girly eyes at her. Surely Willow was smarter than that. Surely she was smarter. But what if she wasn't? What if, while cut loose from Sheena, Donny figured out how to work his way under Willow's skin? What if Donny learned the secret to making her smile or even laugh before Eddie did? What if... No! Eddie surged up off the sofa and stomped into the kitchen, jerking open the door of his brown refrigerator. The shelves were nearly empty. They were always nearly empty. He opened the cupboard door to where he kept his packaged foods and canned goods. Not much to choose from there, either. The basket from Shelley Little still sat at the end of the counter, and he crossed over to it, pulling out the last of the 6 muffins she'd given him, the one he'd been saving for breakfast tomorrow. He would call Mom in the morning and see if she'd scramble some eggs for him. 3 bites in, the phone rang, startling him so that he dropped the muffin on the floor. Cursing mildly, he scooped it up, brushed it off, and set it back in the basket before reaching for the handset on his desk.
Eddie here.
He sighed, preparing himself mentally for whatever emergency awaited him on the other end of the line. It was too late for social calls. "This is Shelley Little in space number 8. I'm sorry to bother you so late." Eddie straightened immediately, the hairs on the back of his neck prickling his skin. This was the second phone call he'd received from the woman in so many months, and he knew, before she said anything else, exactly why she was calling. "He's back, Eddie. He just walked by my place." She sounded calm and steady, just as she had the last time she reported the stranger, her voice somehow soothing to his frazzled nerves.
"I'll be right there."
He almost hung up, but then brought the phone back to his mouth.
"Thanks for calling me, Shelley."
"Of course." Then the phone hummed in his ear, and he punched the end button with his thumb, tossing it onto the sofa as he passed by. He shoved his socked feet inside his work boots, grabbed the industrial-size mag light off the coffee table, and thrust his shoulder into the door. Ironically, it stuck fast, and he had to push much harder than usual. Eddie made his way over the bridge, the moon bright enough that he didn't need any extra light. He paused when he reached the walkway leading to Shelley's front porch, but her house was shrouded in darkness, so he kept going. Apparently, she felt confident that he could handle the task at hand, and it bolstered him a little. Just around the bend, he spotted the man walking slowly, almost carelessly, his feet scuffling the gravel with each step. His hands were in the pockets of his pants, and he wore a flannel shirt, the ends flapping a little in the faint breeze sweeping down from the bank of hills behind the park. He clearly wasn't going for stealth.
"Hey."
Eddie spoke quietly, knowing his voice would carry. Sure enough, the guy turned to look over his shoulder, then stopped altogether and waited for Eddie to catch up to him. They stood a few feet apart, just past Joe's driveway.
"What's up?"
He wasn't interested in playing guessing games with the stranger, but his nonchalance left Eddie feeling uncertain about how best to address the situation. In the moonlight, the man's face looked rather gaunt, the shadows making his features bold and a little fierce. He kept his hands in his pockets and nodded a greeting.
"Hey. Can I help you? Are you here visiting someone?" "No, just taking a walk."
It wasn't the answer Eddie was looking for. He crossed his arms, filling his lungs with air, making himself appear even bigger than he already was. He knew how to do intimidating.
"This is private property. If you're not here at the request of one of the residents, you're trespassing, and I'm going to have to ask you to leave."
Just then, a light blinked on in Willow's cottage, and the stranger turned toward it. Eddie scowled at the raw hunger he saw etched on the man's features. He flipped the switch on his flashlight and pointed it directly in the stranger's face.
"What's your name, buddy?"
There was no way he was going to let this creep leave now. The man turned and looked straight at Eddie, that emptied-out look still there, in spite of the bright light making him squint.
"Christian Goodhope. Who are you?"
May Enchantment, Chapter 5. The husband, ex-husband, or something like it.
"I'm Ed Banks, and you're trespassing."
What the fool kind of name was Christian Goodhope? Sounded like an overgrown choir boy.
"Trespassing? Come on, I'm staying on the road. Not bothering anyone."
Christian withdrew his hands from his pockets, and Eddie narrowed his eyes in preparation for the stranger's next move.
"I'm just taking a walk." "This is a private drive. You're trespassing."
Eddie said it again while scrutinizing the guy's features, memorizing them, making sure he'd remember them if the need arose. Christian turned away from the blinding beam of the flashlight, squeezed his eyes shut for a few moments, then stared openly at the cottage at the end of the drive.
"That's my wife in there."
Eddie flinched. He couldn't help it. He was expecting the guy to claim as much, but he wasn't prepared for the tangible anguish in his voice. It made him think of the harsh rasp of metal on metal, brake pads worn down to nothing, jerking and catching and screeching all at the same time.
"That's my wife, man."
When Eddie lowered the flashlight, Christian's gaze swiveled back to look boldly up at the taller man, and he said it a third time.
"That's my wife." "Not according to her."
Enough. Eddie wasn't interested in this guy's side of the story. Willow had made it clear she didn't want him around, and Eddie intended to honor her wishes and send the guy packing. But not until after he spelled out a few things to this fellow.
"That woman is none of your business, Mr. Goodhope. Not while she's under my care. But I need you to understand something."
He paused for effect, then brought a fist slowly up between them and pointed at his own chest.
"I am your concern. I run this park, and you're not welcome here."
With his other hand, he waved the heavy flashlight back the way they'd come.
"Let's go." "Wait, please."
Christian lifted a hand and pointed in the direction of Willow's place.
"I'm not bothering her. I'm just checking on her. I'm just making sure she's okay."
His voice caught and he cleared his throat hard.
"I just need to know that she's okay." "She's okay. She's more than okay. She's doing great, as you can see for yourself."
The plants on the patio were in full bloom, the vines decorating the front of the cottage like lace in the moonlight. The place, glowing from the inside, looked like something out of a children's book.
"We're taking good care of her. Let's go."
Christian rocked back on his heels and laced his fingers together on top of his head. It almost looked to Eddie like he was trying to hold his skull together, like he might blow at any minute, not in anger, but in frustration, in pain.
"Please,"
he whispered, his voice breaking. Eddie sighed, his own frustration turning a little toward sympathy.
"She doesn't want you here, buddy. She told me so herself. You need to leave."
Christian dropped his hands and lunged toward him, reaching out to grab at Eddie's shoulders. Eddie deflected his grip with the flashlight, knocking both arms away with a sweeping blow.
"Whoa," Eddie growled. "Don't touch me."
He was angry all over again. He'd been caught by surprise, and he didn't like being surprised like this. Not in the dark, in the middle of the night, by a desperate man. But Christian didn't seem to notice Eddie's anger, and even though he let his hands fall to his sides, he leaned forward, his eyes large and bright in the glow cast by the moon overhead.
"She talked about me? What did she say?" "Get it together."
The guy was losing it.
"She didn't talk about you. She just said she didn't want you here. She asked me to escort you off the property if you showed up here again."
The younger man's shoulders dropped. His gaze fell. Everything about him seemed to deflate before Eddie's eyes. Finally, he lifted his head and peered intently at Willow's place again until Eddie prodded him with a clipped command.
"Move along. Let's go."
Together, they strode in silence past Shelley's, across the bridge, alongside Eddie's trailer, then out toward the street. Eddie waited at the entrance of the drive while Christian walked down the way a little to the Dodge Ram parked on the side of the road. He stayed his post until the red truck disappeared into the night, then turned and headed back home, his shoulders drooping under the weight of what had just taken place. How in the heck did he handle this? Should he tell Willow about his conversation with the man who claimed to be her husband? Keep it to himself? What if the guy was stupid or desperate enough to come back?
"I don't need this,"
Eddie muttered, glancing heavenward. Not that he was talking to God. He didn't talk to God, because God didn't talk to him. He'd tried, back when he'd first been diagnosed, but when he didn't get any answers, Eddie came to the conclusion that saving his sorry backside was the best he was going to get out of the big man upstairs. That was fine by him. Eddie figured he hadn't done much of anything for God during the 40-plus years he'd been alive, so why should God do anything for him? Back on his sofa, he flipped on the television again, hoping to shut his head down for the night. But there was nothing on this late, at least nothing he wanted to see. He might as well go to bed. He'd deal with the Goodhope situation in the morning. But his sleep was restless, and he dreamed about Willow, running through the trees in the dark, barefoot, her wild hair flying out behind her, her features haunted by whatever pursued her. Moving covertly through the shadows, ever so slowly, but still keeping up with the terrified girl, was a man, or a monster, he couldn't quite tell. Eddie kept trying to call out to Willow, to tell her to run to him, that he'd protect her, but every time he opened his mouth, only a raspy whisper came out, not even loud enough to be heard above the rustle of the wind in the branches overhead. Frustrated, he began to run. Maybe he could catch up with her before Shadowman did. So close, he reached out and grabbed at the flapping material of her coat, and she turned, her hair whipping him in the face, blinding him for just a moment. When he could see again, it was no longer Willow's lapel he was holding, but his father's, an empty look in his teary eyes, an empty bottle in his hands. Eddie woke with a start, his eyes popping open, his heart pounding like a bass drum in his chest. The morning had already made an appearance, and in the early light he gazed at the pocked foam ceiling above him while he waited for his pulse to slow. Sitting up on the edge of his bed, he propped his elbows on his knees and cupped his forehead in the palms of his 2 hands. It was shaping up to be a long day. By the time he made it over to his mom's trailer for breakfast, Donny was awake and in rare form. "I'm heading over to talk to Sheena," he said in response to Eddie's question. "And if she won't lighten up, I'm done with her."
"Oh, Donny, you be gentle with a daughter to me, you know."
Edith carried an iron skillet from the stovetop over to the table and set it down on a trivet beside Eddie's place.
"There you go, eat up."
She turned back to her younger son, who was combing his hair in front of the mirror hanging on the wall next to the front door.
"You're so handsome, Donny. She won't be able to resist you."
Donny winked at his mother.
"That's the plan."
Eddie rolled his eyes but said nothing. At least if he were going back to Sheena, Willow would be safe for a while.
"So, Eddie, tell me about the new girl in space number 12. I hear she's a hot piece of—"
"Shut it!" Eddie ground the words out, much louder than he'd planned.
"Stay away from her, Donny. She's off limits." "Oh, ho, ho!"
Donny crossed the room and leaned against the counter, grabbing a freshly washed mug from the dish drainer and filling it with coffee.
"Off limits? What does that mean? Are you staking your claim, big brother?"
"Boys, stop it." Edith reached into the refrigerator for a carton of half and half and handed it to Donny.
"The sugar's on the counter behind you, honey."
Turning to Eddie, who suddenly wasn't so hungry, she chastised him.
"Your brother is just curious, Eddie. We all are. So tell us what you know about her. What's her name again?"
Eddie sighed and closed his eyes, trying to remember why he'd thought coming here today in his sleep-deprived state was a good idea.
"Mrs. Goodhope. She's married. Stay away from her."
"What? She's married? I hadn't heard that." Edith leaned against the counter beside Donny, sipping on her own cup of coffee. "So why is she living here alone? And don't try to tell me she's got a man over there. We all know she's on her own." Donny wore a mocking grin, reminding Eddie of the Cheshire Cat from Wonderland.
"I like married women. No commitment required."
"Donny!" Edith smacked his arm with the back of her hand. "Stop joking like that." Eddie knew better. Donny was serious.
"Stay away from her, Donny."
He said it again, his voice low, as he shoved a huge bite of egg in his mouth and chewed, wanting nothing more than to punch his kid brother in the teeth.
"Maybe you should take your own advice, Eddie boy. Sounds like you might be scoping things out for yourself."
Donny shoved off from the counter, gulped the rest of the creamy sweet drink he'd made, and left the dirty mug in the sink.
"I think I may just need to pay Mrs. Goodhope a visit. Warn her about how you get a kick out of preying on other men's women."
Eddie was on his feet, his fists up, before he really thought about what he was doing.
"Stay away from her,"
he growled, closing the distance between him and his brother in 3 steps.
"Eddie, stop!"
Edith shrieked, throwing herself in front of Donny, who smirked at him over the top of his mother's head. Eddie turned and stormed out of the trailer. May Enchantment, Chapter 6. What a fool he was, stirring Donny's curiosity like that. Why hadn't he just kept his mouth shut and let him run off to win Sheena back? Now, not only did he have to deal with the creepy Shadowman, but he had his kid brother to worry about too. And when had he started calling Willow's husband, ex-husband, or something like it, by his evil villain name, Shadowman? Eddie threw his cap on the sofa and clomped into the kitchen, his empty stomach mocking him.
"And I don't prey on women, taken or otherwise," he muttered.
But the thought, like Willow's words the day before, stuck in his craw, too. He'd known Leanne maybe a year before they started seeing each other, and she'd been in a serious relationship with a guy named Craig when they met. Before long, She was stopping by Eddie's place to hang out, talking about how sweet he was, how calm and gentlemanly, what a big guy he was. My gentle giant, she called him. He and Donny were opposites in every way, including the looks department. Eddie was built like a bear, solid, barrel-chested, and thick-limbed, while Donny pranced around like a gymnast, flashing his baby blues at anything in skirts. But Eddie had to admit that it did something for his ego when women drifted his way, especially when they drifted away from the likes of Donny, like Sheena had. In fact, Leanne had done the same thing, having left her man just weeks before Eddie asked her out, offering to comfort her in his beefy embrace. She'd never really been his, not in the way a man and woman should belong together. He'd been her strong tower, her place of refuge, but once the storm of her broken heart had passed, she was ready to move on. And now, here he was, ready to step in and protect Willow Goodhope from a man claiming to be her husband, a man who clearly still cared for her, and from Donny, should the need arise. He pulled out one of the 2 chairs at his dinette set and dropped heavily into it. What a fool! What a fool he was!
So why?
He spoke the words aloud.
Why do I always fall for unavailable women?
He wasn't going to admit to intentionally stealing them. He never set out to do so anyway. All day long the question plagued him, and until he could get it straight in his head, he didn't dare go near Willow Goodhope. The smile, the tears, the sheer proximity of that girl would do him in today with his messed-up head. Instead, he attacked an ancient eucalyptus tree at the back of the property, one that had blown over in the January winds. He'd been meaning to take a chainsaw to it for some time now, having waited long enough for some of the oily liquid in its branches to dry up. It was the perfect outlet for his frustrations, and by the time he'd finished clearing the area, he had a pile of chopped and neatly stacked eucalyptus logs he could sell for firewood and make a mint off of, as well as a few revelations about himself he'd come to grips with. Filling an old metal wheelbarrow with some of the smaller, more manageable logs, he rolled it across the drive and down the way toward Willow's place. She was just returning from the mailbox with a stack of letters in her hands, and her face lit up at the sight of him wheeling up at the edge of her patio. A mental image popped into his mind of Al strategically positioned on a stool at his kitchen counter so he could keep the line of mailboxes in view. "Hi, Eddie," Willow called. "What do you have there?" He nodded in greeting, then tipped his head toward the logs.
"I've been clearing a fallen tree and thought you might want some of the logs for your fire pit. This stuff burns hot, but it smells good if you like eucalyptus. You'll just need to let it season until the fall, otherwise it'll smoke you out."
"How thoughtful of you." She came right up to him, picked up one of the logs, and brought it to her nose. "I do love the smell of this stuff, Eddie. Thank you." She smiled up at him, and over the top of the pungent odor of the sap on his hands, he could smell something else, that lingering woodsy scent that seemed to drift around Willow.
"Where do you want me to put it?"
His tone was gruff, but she didn't seem to notice. She showed him where she already had a pile of fruitwood stacked at the back of the patio, but when she tried to help him, he shooed her off.
"I got this."
She stepped back and watched him work, chewing on her bottom lip. Eddie berated himself for noticing. He found himself taking note of her funny little habits and quirks. When his wheelbarrow was empty, he turned to face her.
"So, I need to talk to you about your—"
"About Shadowman?" she offered, when his words faded away. "I hear he's been named."
"Yes."
In fact, it was easier to think of him that way. Kept him less personal somehow.
"He showed up here again last night."
Oh no." Willow crossed to one of the plastic chairs in front of the fire pit and dropped into it. The gurgling of the little stream that ran alongside her patio drowned out her quiet words, but Eddie had no trouble understanding the look on her face. He indicated another chair nearby.
"Mind if I sit?"
"No, please, sit."
He, said he was your husband. Actually, he said you were his wife."
He took a deep breath and held it, waiting for her to deny it. When she didn't, he let it out in a long, slow huff and continued.
"He said he just needed to know that you were okay. I assured him you were and sent him on his way. He knows he's not welcome here anymore."
He tried to keep his words gentle, but he had to speak a little loudly to be heard above the sound of the water directly behind them, and he wasn't sure how his tone would come off. He turned to look down the driveway to where he'd confronted Christian Goodhope the night before. Movement at Kathy's window caught his eye, and he thought he saw the silhouettes of 2 people. Myra must be visiting. He could just imagine what kind of gossip was going on behind those curtains. When he looked back at Willow, her eyes glistened but stayed dry, her hands still and laid flat over the letters stacked on her knees. "Thank you, Eddie. I'm sure he'll stay away now. I hope you're not worried about me being here." Her eyes scanned the little house and patio around them, finally landing on the elderberry tree growing all crooked and lush beside the stream, clusters of tiny white flowers covering its branches. "I don't want to leave here. Not yet."
Eddie shook his head. "No, I'm not worried. You're fine."
He waited, hoping she'd expound a little on her relationship with Christian Goodhope, but she was chewing on her lip again.
"Okay, I'll be off. You let me know if there's anything else I can do for you."
He stood up quickly, nearly knocking over his chair. Willow stood too, not paying any attention to his clumsiness. "Thank you, Eddie, for everything. You and the others here at the coach house." She spread her arms wide. "You're exactly what I need right now. I can't imagine where I'd be if I didn't have Elderberry Croft and my wonderful neighbors." Her words were simple, heartfelt, and Eddie felt his chest swell. It was good to be needed, especially for the right reasons. He would be here for her. He would watch out for her. He would protect her. And he would do so without trying to win her heart. It was too late for him. He'd already fallen a little in love with her. But then he didn't think he was the only one. She seemed to work her magic on everyone she met, weaving her way into their hearts, stirring up feelings and emotions they'd all thought dormant. Well, he could handle the little thrill he got every time she smiled at him, because he was going to do right by her. He took a deep breath, the corner of his mouth curving up into a smile as he caught the smell of wood chips.
"I'm glad to hear it," he said. "And we're glad to have you here, too."
Then he turned to go, taking his wheelbarrow with him. One day, maybe he'd learn the truth about Willow Goodhope and her Shadowman. But for now, he was content with leaving things the way they were. And one day, maybe, just maybe, someone would happen into his life who was free to love and be loved by him. Someone who would smile up at him without the shadow of anyone else lingering in her eyes. Someone who wouldn't balk at the life-saving device hanging from the hole in his abdomen, who wasn't afraid of death, but would face it by his side when, no, if, the time came a little too early for him. He walked down the driveway toward the other end of the park. He waved at the 2 women standing on Kathy's front porch, made his way past the Davises' trailer, past Joe's place, then paused in front of Shelley's driveway. He should let her know that all was well with the world, thanks to her neighborliness. He looked down at his grubby hands, his sweat-stained shirt, a little too small, stretched over his slightly protruding stomach. The knees of his jeans were smudged from kneeling in the dirt and debris, and he'd forgotten his belt, so his pants kept slipping down. Maybe he'd go shower up first, then return the empty muffin basket to her along with his thanks. Nodding in agreement with himself, he headed across the bridge for home, his shoulders back, chin up. It was shaping up to be a fine day after all. We hope you have enjoyed our production of May Enchantment, Elderberry Croft, Seasons of the Heart, Part 6, written and narrated by Becky Dowdy. Copyright 2014 by Becky Dowdy. Production copyright 2022 by Becky Dowdy. This is a Brave Hearts Press audio production. Thank you for listening.